Hello, Gdansk. It's nice to be back in your beautiful city, even if only on a video link. We have a crisis in our European democracies. As old certainties disappear, older generations are retreating into nationalism, xenophobia, racism, intolerance of diversity. This is compounded by a flow of incomers, refugees and economic migrants, to some extent caused by the economic systems that our democracies have actually profited from. In my country, we have the absurdity of UKIP and Brexit. You know better than me that you have similar problems in Poland. Part of this drift to authoritarianism can be seen in the tendency of many school systems to become themselves more authoritarian, with prescriptive curriculum and high-stakes testing, from which a few multinational companies are making a lot of money. They make even more money by collecting and selling the data back to governments. We know that none of this enhances the learning, creativity and political literacy that our societies need for a sustainable future. The obsession with control produces fear of failure, anxiety, and in a few, rebellion. It's driving our teachers and our kids crazy. We have ever-increasing incidences of mental ill health, depression, self-harm, in both groups, teachers as well as students. I once said at a BZ conference in your city that it's almost impossible to stop children and young people learning. We are a learning species, but schools manage it somehow. Many in the audience clapped, so you must understand this problem in Gdansk. Some had a good laugh as well. I hope you do. The answer is obvious, and it's been obvious for some time. The Council of Europe launched its Education for Democratic Citizenship, Human Rights Education project 20 years ago, with a ministerial statement that I actually helped to draft, saying that young people in their schools and colleges should be active participants in the decisions affecting their learning and the day-to-day management of their institutions. We knew then, and we know even more now, that civics courses that aim to teach young people about democracy and human rights were largely rejected as boring and a waste of time by the students. If anything, they produced cynicism, certainly not engagement. I recall that learning about democracy and human rights when I was at school was like reading holiday brochures in prison, pretty pointless unless you were about to escape or be released. If we want a generation of young people interested in and competent to do democracy and able to respect human rights, then they have to be practiced in our schools on a daily basis and not just talked about by teachers and written about in notebooks and examinations. Some countries took this message more seriously than others, notably the Nordic countries. They all have active school students' organisations that are taken seriously by education policymakers. The Prime Minister of Norway said to me at the World Forum on Democracy Through Education in Strasbourg last year, she said, "I cut my political teeth in Elevorganisasjonen in Norge," which is EON, the Norwegian school students' organisation. It now has at least 12 of its ex-board members as members of the Norwegian Parliament, the Storting. In England, we attempted to create a more participative citizenship curriculum in 2000. It required all 14 to 16-year-olds in all state schools to have the opportunity to participate in democratic decision-making and responsible action. The proposal was attacked by the right-wing press as a waste of precious lesson time when kids should be learning more mathematics. It was said it would lower standards. The minister asked me, as an ex-inspector, if I had any evidence that they were wrong. Well, I found 12 out of the 3,500 state secondary schools in England that managed to involve large numbers, in some cases all the students in the school, in democratic processes and projects built on those processes. In every case, we found that these schools, I called them more than usually participative schools, had better examination results, better attendance figures, and many had fewer exclusions, many fewer exclusions for antisocial behaviour. In some cases, they had excluded nobody at all for the last 5 years, and these figures were much lower than the average figures for all schools in similar socio-economic environments. So the exam results were better, the attendance was better, and the exclusions were fewer in these more democratic schools. My report was called the Hannam Report in 2001. It's available in several languages online, as yet not in Polish, unfortunately. Perhaps one of you will help me. This citizenship project made some progress in a minority of schools until it was dismantled by the new Conservative government in 2010. Now we are back to tests and more tests and yet more tests. And surprise, surprise, our standards are falling again. But we have a growing number of small, privately funded democratic schools in Europe. I was in France 2 weeks ago, where some 35 new democratic schools have emerged in the last 2 years, where previously there were only 2. These are schools that are managed by democratic meetings, where adults and children alike have one vote, where pupils have wide choice over what, how, when and with whom they will study, where there is a democratic judicial process to deal with antisocial behaviour. You have a wonderful example in Poland, in Bulabin's school, and I'm sure Mariana has talked about that this morning. We have 2 such schools in England, Summerhill, which the government tried to close in 1999, fortunately without success. It's now thriving. And the other less well-known Sands School. Now, it's wonderful that these schools exist, and I hope there will be more of them. Through UDEC and IDEC, they are becoming an international movement for change by example. They provide more evidence that it can be done. I call them pioneers of possibility. But, and it's a very big but, the big job remains to be done in our public state schools. This is where the great majority of our young people are, including all those from poor backgrounds who are the most prone, the most likely to be influenced by anti-democratic demagogues. We need to create structures and processes and practices in our state schools that offer all our young people the opportunity to participate in democratic decision making about what and how they will learn. For example, as an ex-inspector, I see no reason why 20% of curriculum time cannot immediately be negotiated between students and teachers to permit the interests and passions of the students to become part of the curriculum. I mean, the state would still have the other 4 days, for heaven's sake. This idea was unanimously agreed by 2,200 participants at the World Forum for Democracy Through Education that the Council of Europe held in Strasbourg last year. Also, all students should have the opportunity to make proposals and decisions about the day-to-day management of their schools, not just an elected few on a students' council, though of course there should be one of those too, but through regular meetings in every class and balloted citizens' juries such as yours. These democratic meetings, council and juries should exist in primary schools as well as secondary schools. There's no reason why students in each secondary school shouldn't create and manage a council or parliament for their feeder primary schools so that they can meet together. There could be a city-wide students' council to represent all the students of Gdansk with balloted juries, perhaps for special issues, specific issues. These councils and juries should have day-to-day access to the educational and other policy-making and decision-making structures and bodies of the city, including the police, I would suggest, because often the police feel misunderstood by young people. Every school, whether primary or secondary, should have student representatives on their governing bodies or school boards. This is actually now official policy in some parts of the world, for example, the state of Victoria in Australia. Well, I've just finished a book about how I tried to create a democratic class, a democratic learning community, if you like, with 34 11-year-olds in a large secondary school 40 years ago. We worked together for 2 years, and I'm still in touch with some of those now 55-year-old kids. I would love to tell you more about it, but unfortunately I've run out of time. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful conference.